Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another very special episode of the War Report. Look, we just keep on racking up victory after victory. I know that Ukraine has some new laws that protect our favorite people, and it's everything they've been fighting the past 4 years for. Yeah, we're at four
Fight
years.
as a fight.
Exactly. Thank you. That they are fighting for all of those key Western values where you will be put in prison for 8 years if you have opinions on certain groups that Zelensky might belong to. Now, I know there's a few of those. We could be talking about, I don't know, actors. We could be talking about, I don't know, perhaps people of a certain persuasion, perhaps pianists. That's also something Zelensky has also done at some point. Or there's some other one. It escapes me. I don't know. Maybe you remember, but it's slipping my
Hmm.
mind right now.
I don't recall.
No, I don't either. I mean, I think it's something that's very definitive about his personality, something that was, he arguably campaigned on, something that Naftali Bennett used to secure his personal safety back in 2022. I don't know. It might be his Costco membership. It's really beyond me. If anyone knows in the comments, live chat comments, whatever, if you want to, I don't know, send a carrier pigeon to my general vicinity, I'll get it. Don't worry. But I think we have some news to talk about. I know it's been just
Yeah.
shy of 2 weeks, and that, of course, nothing has happened in the meantime. Civilization has been saved, crisis has been averted, and we can all thank Donald Trump.
Yeah. Thank you, Donald. Yeah. I mean, we had Orthodox Easter, so it tends to be a very busy time. A lot of evening liturgies. I know I attended them, and it's just hard to coordinate. It's not my frame of mind is not exactly at that time conducive to doing a show. But now it's Easter, which was a really good Easter for me. I hope it was for you.
Oh, absolutely.
Has passed, and we can resume the show with more
Yeah,
regularity.
I'm not kidding when I say that Orthodox Holy Week is probably my busiest week of the year, and I'm not that busy of a person, all things considered.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's and then I've been doing just some not like actual traveling, like going to interesting places, but I've been doing some traveling between different family stuff. So I've been cross state lines a couple times in the past few weeks. So it's been, like I said, a little bit of a little bit up in the air, but for now, we should be able to do things more consistently and get back onto our schedule. But like I said, fortunately, not much happened in our absence, so it should be a short show.
Yeah. Um, Maybe before I begin with the maps, I'll mention the situation, the Russo-Ukrainian war, and that is so the ongoing strikes on energy facilities on Russian territory have, of course, continued. There were two facilities that were attacked a few weeks ago. Now, last week, one of those two, this is in the Gulf of Finland. Both are close to St. Petersburg. One is on the north side of the Gulf, close to Finland. The other one, well, technically, is closer to Estonia. Uh, one of those two, I believe the one in the north, has been operational again for a week. The other one still hasn't recovered. These are the drone attacks that were facilitated by NATO aligned countries allowing the Ukrainians to pass through. Now, we know this is the case. Some of these drones have fallen. I don't know if they've crashed, early for whatever reason, or the Russians hit them. But there's photos that have emerged out of Estonia or Latvia where these drones didn't make it. Uh, but the this week, what I've noticed, and the end of last week, we're recording on Tuesday the 14th. The Russians have begun attacking Ukrainian energy hubs, whether they're refineries or facilities or places. I don't know if Ukraine actually pumps any gas or oil, but the Russians have been doing that. The other, they're in naval attacks, both have retaliated against each other. The Ukrainians attacking a port in all the way in the Caspian Sea. Now, of course, how's that possible unless Ukrainians are in Azerbaijan that are doing this, right? Um, and the Russians in like have attacked Odessa again. They've broken a dam in the north central part of Ukraine, and they've, as I said, they've attacked some other facilities. They also had a very large drone attack. So that back and forth is still going on. And the nature of the war now, you see very few armored vehicles. Most of the territorial swapping that has occurred is both sides, as I've mentioned before, are using filtration methods of small numbers of men who are then supplied again by drones. This is definitely a war of attrition. I know it's been said beaten to death, but that was true the second half of 2022, and it's even more true now, mainly because mechanized forces are extremely vulnerable. One of the Ukrainian troops, Skala, made an attempt around the Pokrovsk region in the town east and northwest of called Grishenya, and an Abrams tank was taken out in the process. So even a very sturdy tank such as that, with of course all the cages and so forth, it still stopped. So now it comes down to manpower, and there was another stopping of. Now there has been a swapping of both the dead and prisoners in the Sumy region. The Ukrainians released over 150 civilians that they had taken as essentially as hostages. So I think it was like 165 for 165. I remember that Le Monde had an article last year where it claimed nearly 200 civilians were killed, executed by the Ukrainians in the Kursk region. This was long after Russia reconquered that area and had expanded territories within Sumy. But that's just to let you know just who's really doing the war crimes in this war. So, but there was, as I said, there was also exchange of the dead, and one of the curious things about the exchange of the dead is for a year and a half now, Russia gives 1,000 men, 1,000 dead Ukrainians, for which Russia received somewhere between 20 to 40. On average, it's like 25 to 35, right? Huge disparity. Now, before we could say that, because 2025 was a very good year for Russia's territorial gains. It was the most since 2022. And you could always say that, well, the reason for this is those Ukrainian soldiers are being left behind. And, the dead have been left behind, or men too wounded to carry on, and they succumb to their injuries, to their wounds. Well, this first quarter of 2026, the exchange of territories are roughly, recall that the Ukrainians conquered something like 200, 300 square kilometers in the Dnepropetrovsk and Zaporozhye region, right? Certainly more than Russia did in that area, or Russia is like did half as much. And now the exchange of the dead was 1,000 to 41. It's last year there were 3 months in the summer, June, July, August, or it could have been July, August, September, but there were 3 months last year consecutively where the Russians gave back 1,000 men and no Russian dead were given back to the Russians. This is why I'm skeptical of ideas that I see. I don't think we know exactly how many dead are on either side. But I think the argument that they're almost 1-to-1 is probably not true. Uh,
Logically,
I
I
don't
don't see how
know.
that could be the case.
Yes, because now we finally have a scenario where the Ukrainians are taking more land, but roughly the same amount of casualties, right? The same exchange ratio of casualties. So, anyways, I just wanted to point out some of these things about the Russo-Ukrainian war, partly because there's so many things to get into, and I just wanted to do that before, so that when we begin with the maps, we don't have to,
Go on
continue
our
talk. We can
tangents,
move,
yeah.
yeah, we can focus on European news, which some will include Russia, like the outcome of the latest election in
Democracy
Hungary.
won, Putler lost.
Democracy certainly won, yes.
That's all you need to know.
Well, at least Orban created the safest refuge for Jews in Europe.
How
But
dare
if
how
if
dare he
but
take
if
that title
immigration,
away from Germany? Do you know how long Germany has struggled to cultivate that title after the 20th century? Do you know what they've done to the German national psyche? So, see, Orban deserved to lose on those grounds alone, but for the exact opposite reason that you thought I would say.
yeah, yeah. So let's
Thank you,
begin with the
BB. Your
maps.
support
The,
is invaluable.
I don't think he cares if Hungary, if Hungary gets a lot of migrants and immigrants, and particularly from Arab countries. There's 1 million displaced people in Lebanon. Um,
Oh no, I think we said this last episode or the episode before. Europe is just a trash can to these people.
yeah, it is just a trash can, and if that makes Jews living in Europe want to move to Israel,
It's a win-win.
although it's a win-win, right? Now they constantly need to do that because I think something like over the last 20 years, something like 1 million Jews have left Israel. So you can see why they're buying those Greek islands or buying property on those Greek islands, and why Milei or whatever of Argentina wants to set up like a little Israel inside Argentina. I mean, this is the country with the largest amount of IMF uh, debt and loans of any country. It's 3 times that of Ukraine, and Ukraine is fighting an existential war. Let's just let that sink in. But let's start with the map. So we're
Certainly.
going to start with the Sumy region, the first one. You can see the Russians are continuing to create this buffer zone. I'm not so sure that this buffer zone, is not a transient thing. Like, if things are going more poorly for Ukraine, Russia, I could see Russia swapping this for territories in Donetsk, for instance, or territories in Zaporozhye or Kherson. In any case, we don't know, but that's a possibility. So you can see that this map is from today, the 14th of April. So you can see the two little regions where they've expanded their control. I mean, I think they're bigger than little. I think these are several kilometers in size, but on the map, they're quite small. Let's take a look, a blow up. You can see that they've already captured what is it? Mirpolske. Now it's taking the forested areas around it, and they've also taken Frohodi, another town. Now, one of the things that Weeb Union said, these are Weeb Union's maps. Uh, Check out his channel and follow him. Is that a lot of the fighters who are here? He speculates were fighters that were moved from the Sherbiansky forest in that region between Liman and Donetsk and, the extreme southeast end of Kharkov, around the town of Liman, but well east of it as well. And now these soldiers have experience fighting in those regions, and so they've probably been deployed there. Something I didn't think about initially. Now, the next thing we're going to look at, now, these sets of maps of Konstantinovka are old. Again, the drought on war maps is still very real. So bear with me. A lot of these maps are going to be 3 to 6 days old. Okay. And case in point, this map is about 3 days old. So I have not heard anything since like the weekend. So this is Konstantinovka. You see the Ukrainians have made a successful push on the southwest side of Konstantinovka, and the Russians have gained a tiny bit of territory to the northeast of Konstantinovka, but otherwise things have remained unchanged. Here's a blow up of the area that the Ukrainians have taken. Now, the Russians did take some territories just south of it, but essentially the Russians have been kicked out of most of Ilinovka. As I said, God rest your soul, I had an aunt named Ilinka, old Slavic name. So now, if we move east from here in the Pokrovsk direction, again, about 3 days old, maybe 4. The Russians have expanded their control north of Rodinske and Grishenya. And so, of course, they want to get Shevchenko, one of 100 towns in Ukraine named Shevchenko.
I wonder if Ukraine has a dearth of significant figures and that they have to maybe resort to the same name over and over.
Yeah, it's like, well, we only got. Yeah, I won't go any further.
No.
Anyways,
Ukraine has a lot of national heroes, including every national hero of Russia. But every Russian figure that Ukraine claims that has a street named after it has to be changed to Ronald McDonald Street. Or I'm
So,
sorry, George Floyd Street is the new one.
yes, my friend showed me a photo from Ukraine posted on Instagram where they tore down the Lenin statue. Now, I don't care if they tear down a Lenin statue, because every time I've gone to Russia and I see a statue of Lenin has been replaced by Saint Vladimir or an important monk, I'm very happy about that. So I have no qualms about it. But he was replaced with a statue of Darth Vader. Like, and my friend is
government. Reddit occupied
yeah.
government.
And he's wondering, why are they like this? He's still puzzled. I spent years trying to explain it to him. And I said, it's because they buy into it, right? They have to completely buy into everything American. Even their own historical figures might either be too associated with Russia, or even if they have a disassociation with Russia, they're not modern enough, and they feel they're impelled to demonstrate their fealty to America, so much so that a bit of like popular culture, slup culture has to be in there. And so a statue to Darth Vader, which none of the babushki will understand. But in any case,
I mean, I hate to be so morbid, but every TCC conscription video you see out of Western Ukraine is at the intersection of George Floyd Avenue and Bandera Street.
Yeah. So,
and I mean, look, yes, that's an exaggeration, but you can find these kind of things that are side by side, where it is this glorification of these 1940s very controversial figures next to the most, let's just be frank, shitlib examples of quote unquote Western culture that you can find. And it all seems together, it all comes together seamlessly, because the only ideology is that you shake your fist at Russia and you go to the front lines, unless you have the bribe money to get out of it.
Yeah, yeah. In Poland, there are these LARPers who dressed as Americans with American flag and everything. Like, oh my God, it's honestly so Albanian.
Thank
But
you, USA.
thank you,
You are my
USA.
best friend.
Yeah, yeah. So let's go to Lima now. I'm forgive me, but we're gonna have to do a little bit of jumping here.
Uh-oh.
So the first slide shows Liman. The Russians have secured some more areas east of Liman, including some trench networks. You can see the little red outline there. It's been like this for at least 2 months now. So this is an area where the Russians are not moving that quickly, that steadily. On the other hand, the Ukrainians have not been able to mount any counterattack here. The territory that you see north of Liman, towards the upper left-hand corner, that was conquered by the Russians, I believe, in January or December. I think more January than December. That has cut off some important flows of resources needed for the soldiers. Now, wait for a second. If you look down at the bottom, toward the bottom right-hand corner, but away from it, sort of off-center, you'll see an area that is neither red nor blue, and it's it's the town of Yampil, but this has been kind of a no man's town, and the next slide will show you what's going on. Um, this is an area where Ukrainian soldiers have been in the basements there for months. Now, the Russians have just moved around them. They're not going to waste time with them, but they are refueled from time to time, quote unquote, refueled, with important necessities, ammunition, food, etc. Uh, and it's been this way for months, if not 6 months. Now, bear with me. Let's go to the bottom, and yes, there's the blow up of Lima. I guess we don't need the one below that one.
Okay.
Yes, so you can see now the area that the Russians took. It's a sizable area. In any case, very slow moving in Lehman. Um, where to next? So Kupiansk. Now, these images from Kupiansk, these maps, are from the 9th of April. So just, keep that in mind. Nearly a week ago. So the Russians made gains to the southeast of Kupiansk, totaling 27 square kilometers. And you can see that I've outlined near the top to the left where Kupiansk is located. But there's that important road, and the next map will show you what Russia is trying to do. They're trying to resupply their forces in Kupiansk. And you can see there's only there's two patches where it's still not ideal. But for the majority of this area, now they have the buffer space that they need. And then lastly, a blow-up map of Kupiansk. Now, this map is interesting because it shows that the Russians are further into the city than we previously thought. Initially, we thought, except for one small area, the Russians were only on the east side of the Oskol River, but that's actually not the case. And so that's it for Kupiansk. As I said, these are nearly a week old. Now we move to more recent dates and begin with Zaporozhye. Just south of Zaporozhye city, the Ukrainians have made another successful counterattack. You can see the yellow outlines. That's what it was around, let's say, April 9th, April 8th. And then today, the 14th, they added more zones that they obviously what to do here, drive the, and if they do that, then the town of Stepnosk and Plavny are in. Uh, so this was an area that was very important for the Russians to take in Zaporozhye. And you can see that the Ukrainians have switched directions. They've learned a lot since 2024 and 25. Instead of trying to mount these extravagant um, multiple force incursions into Russia, the kind that we saw in Kursk, including uh, in Kharkov, and like they weren't ever able to repeat that, and because the Russians just adapted too quickly. And even though Kursk had a success that lasted for a few months, the Russians have managed to reverse it and now control territory that they've held on to for well over a year. Anyhow, so what the Ukrainians are doing is in smaller infiltration measures. You saw earlier how they in previous shows how they went into East Zaporozhye, and now they're doing that in West Zaporozhye. That area north of Gulyapolye, I have maps to show you, but in essence, the Ukrainians took away from the Russians the second line of defense, but they were not able to go further south. And so now they're redirecting their forces in a different area to stymie the Russians from perhaps picking up the pace here in Western Zaporozhye. So the next map will show you, it's slightly more zoomed in. You can see that the Russians lost Yakovlinka, Nova Yakovlevka. The Russians are still holding on to Pavlovka, but as I say, the Ukrainians are quite close here, and we'll see what happens. The next slide is the area of Donetsk and Dnepropetrovsk, which is not far from eastern Zaporozhye. The Russians made some gains here. They took a town that they had once 2 years ago. That's what the red outline with four little pistol images represents. The next slide can show you a little bit more clearly. Oleksandrov Oleksandrograd. That's fun even for me. So yes, and now let's look at an overall map of Zaporozhye. So in this map, you can see the area that I was just talking about. This map is current. The white outlines represent Russian gains, and the yellow outlines represent Ukrainian gains. But the only gains that happened today was the area that we just looked at in a small area in eastern Zaporozhye. Notice as I said, that the second line of defense, the Ukrainians have completely taken away from the Russians. Now the Russians controlled almost all of that, but now they don't. And but I think you know I think the Ukrainians would love to go further south into Gulyapolye and take over the second line of defense, or the first line of defense, which is the second line altogether, that they would have taken. But the Russians did manage to push back. Those white outlines and the yellow outlines are roughly from, I would say, 3, 4, 5 days ago. So the Russians have managed to stabilize this front. And you can see that the Ukrainians, as soon as they see that maybe they've reached the limit here, they move into Western Zaporozhye. Let's just take a look at that tiny area where the Russians did take uh, a small village. You can see it above the yellow outline. Kosov Kosovtsove. Um, and the Ukrainians are still holding on to that trench network just underneath it in that little area. So now I honestly thought this salient where the Russians have formed, would have fallen by now, because this is a notoriously difficult area for the Russians to hold on to. This is a very dangerous area to resupply their troops. And I don't know how many drones they have in order to do that. I imagine some of it is happening on foot. But that's it for the maps, and then we can get into the news now.
Well, as I had said before, major victory. Zelensky has made anti Semitism an 8-year punishable
Yeah.
offense, which I know there's ongoing Ukrainian offensives right now, but I think that's probably the most successful one really all year, maybe in the past 18 months.
Mhm.
I don't know. I could be wrong about that. But with all that being said, the more important news is that Zelensky is also the recipient, or I'm sorry, not recipient, not yet, a nominee for the 2026 Nobel Peace Prize. But
He's fighting evil.
he is. This is the gates of Europe. This is the last bastion of civilization. Without Ronald McDonald Avenue in downtown Kiev and downtown Lvov, the Russians may have driven all the way to the Rhine already.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
can't have that. That would be a worse fate than Germany becoming an open air prison for men ages 17 to 45. It would be a worse fate than Algerian rioters in France plundering the pension fund with the expressed approval of Macron. That would all be worse than Russia being part of Europe, or Russia still standing as a neighbor to Europe,
Hmm.
which is
Hmm.
why
Hmm.
democracy needs to win, which is why we need to support Ukraine, which is why Friedrich Merz needs to deport the millions of military-aged men in Ukraine. I'm sorry, of Ukrainian descent or of Ukrainian nationality, more appropriately, back to Ukraine so they can be mobilized for the next offensive, really. But getting back to a more serious note, that last story was serious. That is something that Mertz is once again proposing. He's said this multiple times, but it feels slightly more serious, to judging by his rhetoric. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. But
Yes.
right now, we have a representative of the Ukrainian Air Force Command, Yuri Ignat, saying, and I quote, "We are nearing the end of our Patriot missiles. We are constantly asking for more. If we are left without these desperately needed missiles, we'll be left without everything, and the Russians will destroy our most important infrastructure." Which I'm sure there is a touch of exaggeration there. A lot of these military
Yes.
spokesmen employ this rhetoric very, very tactfully. Of course, Ukraine is probably not on the brink of running out of Patriot missiles, but he wants to send out that messaging, or ever put him out there to say that wants to send that messaging so they can correct the issue before it actually reaches that. We've seen this in particular in the Ukraine war over and over again, where Zelensky goes on his begging tour, where the funds are there to sustain the war effort for the near future, let's just say, to be generous. But the entire point of the begging tour is to secure the aid pledges and secure the actual acts to provide the aid themselves, so the several month to maybe a year more turnover it actually takes for the aid to be delivered is able to prevent any, say, gaps in it, which is the big concern, which is why Ukraine is simultaneously always on the brink of collapse, but also is willing to march on Moscow in the next week. Because that's the sales pitch. If not for your support, we would not be ready to march on Moscow next week, is how they do it. Which has to employ a narrative that on the surface is contradictory, to the point where Ukraine is both the strongest army in Europe, but also an insolvent, weak state, which, I mean, that actually, funny enough, is true. They're correct for the wrong reasons in that case. But it, it really is. The AFU is the only functional institution in Ukraine, and that's not to its benefit. I'll just be the first to say that. And I suppose if you want to consider the TCC as part of the armed forces of Ukraine, I'm not sure the exact legal breakdown of that. But point being, at the very least, it is an auxiliary to military operations. Therefore, it's a functional organization. But with all that being said, there's the combination of that, and then there's also the combination of the great deal of uncertainty surrounding Iran, not only jeopardizing potential American continued support for Ukraine, but also the almost certain economic crisis that will wreck European economies in the next 12 to 18 months as a result
Well,
of the Hormuz
you're going to
crisis.
see effects in the next 2 weeks
Yeah, oh, yeah,
because the
absolutely.
last,
But I'm saying like in full swing, like
yes, absolutely. Yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up. That you're going to start seeing visible effects probably within the next 2 weeks to a month. But in terms of the crisis becoming full fledged, we're probably, I don't know, maybe looking at 12 months to 18 months if I just had to take a shot in the dark guess with that. And all that being said, that is not a Europe with the means to continue giving to Ukraine unless they are to go on the harebrained policy of we're going to start stripping away basic state services and infrastructure in order to support this war. Which I'm not saying will
I'd
happen.
love to see them try. That would be awesome.
Oh no,
Because
please.
their societies would be in total doo doo.
Oh, absolutely. I hope they do it. I hope that they show these people who they quote unquote represent where their priorities really are. I hope they completely illegitimize themselves that way. I hope Macron, Mertz, Starmer, I hope all these people show what their real priorities are, get over the song and dance of liberal democracy and the best interests of our country, quote unquote, our values, quote unquote, European values. Please do it. Be my guest. Because I can tell you, even with the funds you could scrape together by plundering your own state, it's not going to keep Ukraine on life support very much longer. It will prolong the war, but not indefinitely. And at what cost? At the cost of probably the most violence we will have seen on the streets of Europe in decades, possibly since World War II. I know it's hard to compare organized armies fighting even in urban combat to, say, general civil unrest, but you have the combination of the native populace that has been completely abandoned by its own government, these recent imported populations that are really wards of the state in many sense. You think about the Turkish population in Germany, the Algerian population in France, whatever cacophony of ethnicities have been imported into the UK in the past, I don't know, 5 to 10 years. Thank you, Boris Johnson, once again. What would we do without you? What would Western civilization have ever done if you didn't decide to make those decisions at that crucial time? But point being is you have all these people who are brought over with the understanding, implicit understanding, I should say, you will provide political loyalty in exchange for us providing material benefit. When that material benefit dries up, the best case scenario is that these people just go home. Worst case scenario is they're out on the streets raising hell, which I think the latter is much more likely in that case.
I think we could see protests the kind that we saw in Europe and North America in the 60s and 70s.
To say the least.
Yeah. Now, the reason I said that Iran has to hold out for the next 2 weeks is because the last containers that left the Straits of Hormuz, the Persian Gulf, they're going to arrive in Europe in the next 2 weeks. And after that, it's going to be very difficult. Now, today, Trump reintroduced sanctions on Russia, and we'll get into the whole U.S. blockade of the Persian blockade and so on and so on. But
what was that? Open the straits, you crazy bastards.
He's such an idiot. This is where do we even begin?
Yeah,
but
like I said, I defended Trump through many things in his first term and part of his second term. But I will say some of that was cope on my part. But it's objectively worse than it ever was.
I agree. I did too. I I wanted him elected, especially in 2016. Oh, those were fun times. But anyhow,
Stop
they really were.
reminiscing.
No, I will never have that time again in my life. But um, yeah, as I was saying, the crunch is going to come, right? Now, we know that China bought over 20% more gas and oil from Iran and another 26% extra from Russia in the weeks leading up to uh, America and Israel's attack on Iran. That attack was supposed to happen on the 21st of February, but they were, according to the New York Times, uh, Iran was tipped off and the attack was delayed for another week. In any case, uh, now, so China obviously knew that this was going to happen, as did Russia, inevitably. Maybe it's a few weeks or a month in difference, but they know it's coming. So China is prepared for it. It will affect disproportionately more in the short term the other Asian countries than it will China. In the long term, well, then, yeah, that will affect China as well. But I think that's one of the things we should keep in mind.
Oh, absolutely. And I'll always make the caveat when we talk about China, while it certainly will not escape from this with no issues, the other East Asian countries will be affected magnitudes more. Talking about
Oh yeah,
Japan, South Korea. There's a reason the Taiwanese opposition was meeting with Chinese officials last week.
yes, yes, and part of the reason that Trump introduced this blockade and a block is to pressure China. But so far, China has never bent the knee to the U.S. Not during Biden's time, and certainly not during Trump's second term.
No, I mean, they have no reason to, because even if they decide to enter negotiations, number one, they're doing it from a weaker position. Number two, we've seen with both Russia and Iran at this point how duplicitous that entire process is. There is no
Yeah,
motivation to discuss anything with the American government as it stands. And that's not a condemnation of Donald Trump in particular. This goes back to the Biden era. It's just much more in your face than the Trump era. And I suppose out of anything I could appreciate Trump for at this point is that there's just no pretense. It's just that the American
yeah,
empire's policy is laid bare. There's no more. I mean, there's plenty of reading through words, but I'll just put it this way: it's a lot easier to get to the true intentions of what Marco Rubio is saying than it was for Blinken.
yeah. Now, one of the things in this article, as a result, even a ton of Iranian supply would only deplete China's emergency reserves by 10%, because China was prepared for this, right? Also, okay, you can have the blockade. Now, the maps I've seen today, traffic is extremely static. Six vessels, including a Chinese vessel, were ordered to turn around, which they did. However, when you look at Qatar, who had the largest gas reserves in the world that were attacked by Iran, right? Those reserves, that ability to produce gas again, they were completely turned off, by the way. It will take years for them to restart. So, in a way, you could argue that that the blockade that Trump has introduced is a kind of a half measure. It's maybe even less than a half measure. It could be futile because a lot of Kuwait, Qatar's, Bahrain's potential to export gas, what is ever in the ships now, is there like that they managed to squeeze out a month ago or judiciously during the heaviest period of fighting that occurred throughout March, right? Um, those tankers have been there for almost 2 months now. Well, a month and a half.
Oh yeah, and yeah, well, we're coming up on 2 months in the next couple weeks here, and I mean, I hate to imagine the condition on board those tankers at this point, where many of these were probably have supposed to have completed their journeys at this point, and I mean, there's a number of compounding crises when it comes to everything involving this, and we are in the middle of the so-called ceasefire right now. We'll talk a little bit more about Lebanon down the road here, but there was discussion of the food crisis, the water crisis, the energy crisis, particularly as it relates to the Gulf states, which are, in terms of infrastructure, even in terms of politics, completely artificial creations. Under normal circumstances, these countries would not exist. There's a reason that they were dominated by, and I'm painting with very, very broad brushstrokes, but bear with me. There's a reason why these were the Bedouin lands for thousands of years, if we're being honest.
Yes.
Because the only way that they can sustain the kind of population, the kind of infrastructure they have right now, is billions of dollars investment that's based on their robust energy industry. Their populations are kept sedated by welfare payments funded by that robust energy industry, and they are fed and kept. I mean, you look at the obesity rates in some of these countries, and kept quite well fed by, once again, the funds that come in from this robust energy industry, which has been shaken to its core by the February 28th war. And even though the fighting has ostensibly stopped, not entirely, but compared to what it was just, say, a few weeks back, it's certainly an improvement. I am glad that in terms of just human suffering that we are at this pause, but I do fear what comes next. And there's
It
no.
will be a resumption of war.
Oh, absolutely. There will be. There's no question about that. But point being is, even if, God willing, this is the end of it, that the ceasefire somehow holds indefinitely, which I don't believe it will, but just bear with me
No.
here. Confidence in the region has been shaken so much to the point where the joke going around, which I think is a lot more than a joke, and I agree with, the idea of Dubai is dead. The idea of this city of the future built in the middle of the desert, funded completely by foreign capital, finance, and the energy industry that's supposed to host the world elite when it comes to business talks, diplomacy, all of that. No, nobody's going to do that. Dubai was shown to be a cardboard city at the mercy of Iranian munitions. And that really what this has proved is, and look, think what you will about Iran. You can love them, you can hate them. But what this conflict has proved, and I would include Israel in this, is that Iran, and I suppose you want to consider Turkey, but I don't think they're exactly in the kind of question I'm discussing right now. But Iran is the only real country in the Middle East. Like I said, one might say Israel, but I think Israel has been shown to be pretty much on the ropes with this, shown that although they wield an immense amount of political influence over the United States, they are dependent on the military infrastructure of the United States for its continued existence, which I would say disqualifies them from the title. Turkey is a different case, but I think with what area we're talking about geographically, it's not relevant to the question. But in all of this, all the countries involved directly in this conflict in the Middle East, Iran has proven to be the only real country, love it or hate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Proven they're actually much stronger than was initially suspected. Now, I have I wanted to just read to you something that from a French publication called Economie by Armel Bohim.
That doesn't
Can't even
sound like
pronounce
Emmanuel
it.
Todd to me.
No, so uh, T. Birol, director of the International Energy Agency, wrote, "The current crisis is more serious than that of 1973, 1979, 2022 combined." And just to emphasize, it was Ross Lafon that the Iranians struck in Qatar. Uh, it, the cessation of yeah. So with the attack on Ras Laffan, this takes away 20% of the world's energy. Uh, Other energy sources that will be gained, and of course they will have. Uh, on some level, the Americans will like this, but they don't produce the amount of gas that's necessary. And so just this potentially lost 20%. Well, so has the rest of the world. China has much bigger reserves, and well, China has more flexibility because of the energy supply from Russia. And Russia's food exports to China hit a historic high in the first quarter of 2026. So, yeah. Anyways, yeah, this is a very very interesting situation that's developed here. Uh, one of the things details are coming out on, for instance, the Navy is an MQ-4C Triton surveillance drone. We've speculated all countries during war, if they can hide certain losses, they will, right? If they can. So this drill, sorry, this surveillance drone, it's one of those really big ones with a jet on the back, and it has like the head of it looks almost like an orca. These are very sophisticated.
Yeah,
They're
these are the drones that would be all over the news in the Obama era, just to put a mental image to it.
so I'm just gonna send it to you.
Okay, I'll go ahead and get that up as soon as you get it over. Yep, that it's one of these ones.
Yeah.
So I'll have this up in just a second for everyone.
So this was taken out by the Iranians using the Russian Buk M2 missile. Um, but I suppose the reason I bring this up is that it could be a good segue to talk about the rescue operation by the Americans and
Oh, the
I don't know if you want to get into it
no,
or
no.
like if
I
you
think we briefly can. Enough time has passed, enough dust
yeah
has settled, where I think everyone understands the staging
yes
of this operation, so to speak. And this was this was bizarre. And if you want a beat by beat breakdown of what actually happened, I would recommend the
Mm.
academic agent video on it. I think he did a very thorough job explaining just the bizarre
History
official
Legend
narrative.
did as well.
Who was that?
History Legend also did a very good job of it.
Yeah, I did not see that one, but I believe it. So I'll just recommend that one just on based on his previous works. I trust that he did his due diligence on that. And anyone who wants a beat by beat breakdown that has not seen those yet, I would recommend those two because it'll tell you everything you need to know to the most granular detail, as both often do. But what I found most interesting about that, beyond any details or lack thereof or narrative spinning, was the speculation that this quote unquote rescue operation with 150 aircraft overhead and however many billions was spent to pull off the rescue of one downed American pilot. Some speculate this was a ground raid operation or a more deeply involved military operation involving engagement with targets on the ground and possibly the dreaded boots on the ground that had to be aborted because it simply was not panning out. And that the cover for all of this, for this massive deployment of resources, was rescuing this guy that was down behind Iranian lines. I'm not saying I subscribe to that theory fully, but it does make a lot more sense than the official narrative of this guy hiking how many miles.
At least 5 miles.
Yeah, it
At
was.
least 5 miles.
It was something ridiculous. Uphill at that, while allegedly being injured. So
Yeah, with a sprained ankle.
yeah,
Now, one of the things that everybody kind of got wrong, and if we did a show around this time, we probably also would have gotten it wrong, is the initial area where it was suspected that the F-15E was shot down was I'll send you the map. Um, was in an area of southwestern Iran, close to the Iraqi border, but several kilometers north of the shoreline of the Persian Gulf. That's where they initially thought it was, right? The main reason for this is there were images of at least two helicopters and refueling, and then helicopters that were going north, and then helicopters coming south. And that was the first clue that this plane was shot actually very close to the city of Isfahan. And this is also an area that includes the Isfahan nuclear site. One of the things that I forget who said it was, 155 aircraft were used for this rescue mission. And he said, 155 is too much for a rescue mission, and it's too little to remove nuclear waste from the Isfahan nuclear site, which is only like 10 kilometers from the outskirts or 20 kilometers from the outskirts of Isfahan city, which I believe is like 2 million. So it's a fairly large place. Now, the crash site we know now was south of Isfahan by 26 kilometers from the Isfahan nuclear site. And the speculation, which I think makes much more sense, the official statements from the White House make no sense at all, is that there was a mission to probably destroy and seal off the nuclear site, not to extract anything, but to make it impossible to go back in. It's an insane idea if it proves to be true, because there's footage of right after the 12-day war, the Iranians moving material out of there, the 600 pounds or 600 kilograms of what would you call it? Processed uranium. Look, what's the
I
correct
suppose
term?
enriched is the word that
Enriched, yeah, enriched uranium. Yes. So also, they would not go to. They would not have utilized. And of course, I have failed to mention that there was a strip where the American planes that did land there, just south, like not very far away from where the plane had crashed. Again, just south of Isfahan, right? Not very far away at all. And the idea that they would have just tried this without being first sure that it was safe to land there is frankly preposterous, right? Now, but who did test it out? It could have been the Americans, or it could have been the Israelis a year before. Obviously, this shows like that some of Iran's defenses are quite porous, right? But Trump claimed in speech after the rescue that these planes got stuck in the sand. It was wet sand. It was mud, right? Like, but then they flew 4 different planes to rescue over 100 commandos. How come they didn't get stuck, right? It's preposterous. Plus, the what are they? The JC-130s, the regular JC-130s that were destroyed, and the Americans destroyed them. But we know from the pictures and video footage that all these planes have strafing. They were all hit at one point or another with with munitions from the Iranians. Yes, the Americans bombed them, but the truth of the matter is they uh, I'll send you another map. This is no, this is where sorry, never mind. Anyways, the Americans even bombed the road leading to the strip in order to stop the Iranians from getting there. Of course, 130 Warthog was also bound in this process. So it's most likely that the Americans had some kind of enforced infiltration. They saturated the sky with 155 planes in order to partly jam, but partly also confuse which aircraft they would hit. And but two planes were hit, and at least two helicopters were hit, but the Americans claimed they made it back to base. The other thing that, that seemed odd was, the use of, the so-called Little Bird helicopters. They're different than the Jolly Greens that got strafed that I just mentioned, which are essentially like a Black Hawk, right? Um, so you can see that the JC-130s, they can hold like two helicopters. These are little helicopters, and just to be fair to Blumf, he said, these helicopters, they in 10 minutes they fixed them. I think what he means is that the propellers. He was talking about the propellers. I think he means these are foldable or they're detachable. They have to be attached before you can use them.
Yeah.
I don't think he understood that very
And
well.
considering his rather lackadaisical approach to military briefings, that's probably what he recalled from it.
Yeah, I think that's how he did it. That's how, which makes it even more fantastical. Of course, his audience will, the diehard magatards who support him will really like that. But so there is, they do mention this. They mention like this. It is true, but this would happen with with a much smaller force. So obviously, the truth of what exactly happened here is not being revealed by the Americans. And yeah, so this shot will show you like the mountains at this. Of course, we still don't know the names. 2 weeks later, we still don't know the names of the pilot and the weapons officer sitting behind it. What we were told is that he was the colonel, which usually a colonel wouldn't do it. But of course, history legend explains if he's a lieutenant colonel, it's more likely. But then that conflicts with another article I read that said he was second in command of one of the Air Force bases inside of Saudi Arabia, named King something. I forget the
Is
name
that the
now.
King Salman?
I don't think that was the
No,
name.
no. I know which one. I know it's.
You know which
Yeah, I
one?
know which one you're trying to think of. I just can't remember the name either.
Yeah. So yeah, so this is this was a very interesting drama that unfolded. I did find it very interesting, and I wanted to hear as many people explain what exactly happened here or what most likely happened here. Um, Larry Johnson had a good few interviews, not just one, but I'm sure he made I did the one on Judge Napolitano and Daniel Davis deep dive, but I did see the one that he did with Ryan Dawson. And I mean, if anybody knows his stuff, it's him. He even mentioned like it wouldn't be Navy SEALs, it would be something jumpers, para something jumpers who are qualified to administer medicine and so on and so forth, right? Um, Now, it could very well be that they exaggerated the extent of the weapons officer. He had a sprained knee. Trump described him as bleeding profusely, like, and he climbed 5 miles up, and it was like finding. It's like I love this part. It was like finding a needle in a haystack. Yeah, a needle in a haystack with a transponder. Like,
But you know what I can count on?
yeah,
In 15 years, there will be a Hollywood movie that tells us every single detail that will not lie
yeah.
about or obscure anything else that happened.
Yeah, AI Tom Cruise will.
Tom Cruise will still be alive. Don't you
Yeah,
don't go there.
don't you dare! Don't you dare!
Okay, look, I don't know. Is he still a Scientologist? I think they have some sort of.
That's,
Uh,
I mean,
I,
he's done something.
yeah, I don't know enough to care, but I know that all these people have like some sort of kabbalistic magic that keeps them alive against all odds. I'll just say.
Yeah, so I'm gonna send you one more photo, two more photos, and I'll show you the bullet mountains that this guy climbed up to. You can see.
Okay, I'll get those up. And let's see, those are.
Now, the Iranians said that they shot them down. Now, I think it's entirely possible that they took fire. I really do. One of the telltale signs that they didn't crash is the propellers, which I think might be made out of titanium or a mix. They melted in a certain way. They don't show like if they crash, they wouldn't look the same way. But you can clearly see that they received large munition entries into their hulls. That's for sure. That's not the bombs that the Americans dropped on them
No,
later.
that's it's
But you
not
can
it's
see,
not up for debate, especially aircraft operating at that low of a range. I mean, they would be vulnerable to small arms fire. I'm not saying that's what that is, but point being is it's not unheard of that helicopters sustain damage from small arms fire, especially in Afghanistan. There's a number of cases where you can refer to for that.
yeah.
But
But
overall,
anyway, I just thought we covered. The other interesting thing on the video by History Legends is he shows like an Indian variant of the same planes that were grounded because of mud, but it didn't affect the other planes. You see them going through like you can't even believe this is the runway. It's just dust. It's just desert. The Pakistanis are flying this thing. The variant that the Americans use has an even more robust wheel structure in order to deal with even more difficult terrain. There's something not right here. They either took too much fire and had to leave. Now, the other thing is the way they were parked on the runway. Again, another insight by History Legend. They were not parked one right behind the other. Both of them were on an angle that formed kind of like a square. And that's a defensive measure to give the most amount of cover. That's what I think that is. Right. I thought I had a picture. Unfortunately, I do not. What a shame because it definitely showed like the way they were situated. Uh, like I say, it's not like going to an airport seeing one behind the other. One is off on one angle, the other one is off on an other angle, and the wings form like a square shape. That's how they were found. That's how they were photographed from above. And um, yeah,
yeah, I mean, there is a lot I could say about this case. You've said a lot of what I was thinking. You had more of the granular detail just on hand than I did. But I mean, it's hard number one, to take this story at face value. Number two, it's increasingly more bizarre, I should say, that Trump's threat to end civilization, followed up by his 180 into a so-called ceasefire, was followed by this, because the timeline, this was over the weekend of the third, fourth, and fifth, Western Easter, or yeah, I'm not gonna make the joke. Yeah, I made it last episode. I'm not gonna make the joke. Yeah. Those of you who saw last episode, you know what joke I'm holding back on. And then it was Tuesday the 7th. Trump was supposed to give his civilization changing speech about how we're going to wipe Iran off the map, but fortunately, that did not happen.
Not if it hurts Israel.
So true.
Yeah, I sent you another map that shows you Stefan, where the aircraft wreckage was.
Okay, and I'll cross reference this with the overall map that you sent first.
Yeah. So if you look where it says Isfahan, south, just underneath it, before you get to the ridge, underneath the letter N, that is where the nuclear facility is.
Okay.
So you can see how close they were, right? Now they had over 35 refueling planes. Just think about that. That's enormous.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just
So
for those of you looking at the screen, that red dot on the overall map is where it is, and then on the bottom right corner, I have the zoom in of Isfahan, and like I said, you should be able to see it all right here. But yeah, this is what they're trying to sell you. This is the official name,
and they're trying to sell you, right? Like that the weapons officer walked to the mountains. Look at those mountains. Those mountains, like they have to be like over 10 miles away. And he went up there and hid in a crag. I mean, I don't know what to believe. You know what I mean? That's a fair distance, but it's possible. Because he was down, I think, on Thursday, right? And they rescued him on or Friday, and they rescued him. Of course, he made the, he I think was Hexeth said that we lost him on Friday. He was in the dark on Saturday, and we lifted him up on he's trying to make it seem like the death and resurrection of Christ, like just really cheap stuff. But
frankly, I'll say the most surprising thing about that is that Hegseth even had the prerequisite knowledge to make such a comparison.
Actually, speaking of Hegseth, that New York Times article, apparently at one point he said I always expected Iran to fight back at least a little bit, but he said when the regime change didn't work. Now think of all the time he said, because you know what, we had a regime change. All those press briefings where he said that. Apparently behind closed doors he said, I thought, wow, we're really in this now. Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, you're fall guy, ladies and gentlemen. And look, Hegseth deserves all the criticism in the world, don't get me wrong. But I want you all to remember, because I don't see this discussed nearly enough, every substantial decision that comes out of the Pentagon comes from Steve Feinberg. Hegseth is just the front man. He's there to take the lumps.
Yeah.
Which, like I said, they couldn't have found a better guy for it.
Oh yeah, he loves to shit talk. He loves to be arrogant. We were going to ruthlessly bomb them, like. and it's funny because today Vance, who again, according to the New York Times article, was not in favor of this war. In fact, he had to have a difficult phone conversation with Netanyahu in the middle of March. But yeah,
isn't that just a? Oh no, I see what you've sent me.
I'm interested.
But I mean, isn't any phone conversation with Netanyahu just difficult?
It would have to be. You're right.
Okay. No. We're getting a lot of mileage out of the imagery tonight. For those who are audio only, I sincerely ask that at some point you at least breeze through some of the episode visuals because they're no that's yeah, that's I mean, like I said, I could go on about Hegseth, but
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
point in punching the punching bag because that's all he is.
Yes. Yes. That's his role.
Yeah, that's all he was ever good for, and that's why they put him
Yeah.
up there. And honestly, while I think a lot of things are coordinated politically, I think he's none the wiser to it. I don't think he knows that he's a mouthpiece for Steve Feinberg because the man is. Well, I remember one of my first apprehensions about the second Trump administration. I called this the Fox and Friends cabinet because that's what it felt like. Just all the talk show circuit people that Donald Trump picked out and said, "Oh, you look cool. Oh, you must be Secretary of Defense." To the point
Mm-hmm.
where, and I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent, Trump's very grug-brained first-term approach of, "Wow, scary general," was honestly a more coherent approach than whatever this is. Because there's a logic there. I'm not saying I like the logic, but there is a logic there.
Yeah, you know what? It was Larry Johnson who said this is too big for an extraction and too small to take out the uranium. So I think deduction. We'll leave it after this, I guess, because we've gone on much longer. I'm sorry. It's that uh, the destruction of this facility may have acted as maybe a way for Trump to exit or maybe to score points because in a recent survey, including one in Israel, only 23% of people in Israel believe that they won this war with Iran. And the number is not better in the US either. So
Yeah, I mean, when the Israelis are displeased, what more can you really say? They're the arbiters of these things. If they're displeased, then something was not accomplished. Clearly, us feeble Gentiles, I'll say for the sake of keeping it, I don't know, YouTube friendly, if one wants to put it that way. Clearly, we couldn't understand what the metrics of victory really are.
yeah.
But what I do think is interesting is amidst this quote unquote rescue operation and then the sudden ceasefire that never was, if you talk about Lebanon at least, was the complete cleaning of house at the Pentagon where Hegseth just, I think it was upwards of 12 individuals were dismissed
Mm.
from their posts. And as to who their successors were, it was never really followed up on. Of course, all these people have an immediate, it's somebody immediately under them who assumes that role upon that. But I don't know whether they're just interim or whether they're just going to stay in that position, what the exact internal mechanisms of the Pentagon are. But I can't imagine if you have the top brass, who I'm not here to defend, the top brass has said and done many objectionable things over the just recent few years, not to mention past several decades. I can't imagine that their direct underlings would be too much more amenable to the idea of this disaster of a war. Granted, it could be that once the message is sent of a mass purge, of a mass firing, the people who assume those jobs will act in, I guess, what you'd call their own self interest and toe the party line from now on. That could be the move there, but also in terms of efficacy of an already beleaguered military, as we've seen since February 28th, it doesn't bode well. I mean,
Yeah, what's their strategy? I mean, what do they do? What does Trump do next? Like, I mean, we're gonna wait and see what these next 2 weeks bring about.
yeah. Well,
Of
actually,
course, we're gonna have to
as
look
we're
at the
recording,
markets.
week one has expired, so week two is, we're already in week two of the ceasefire. So by this time next week, on the, let's see, that'd be the 21st, it's supposed to be over.
Yeah, and I would think him re-sanctioning Russian tankers is probably an indication that it may even start sooner than next week. Um, Especially if the markets are bad. Remember, Trump got elected saying that he was going to bring interest rates down. I mean, they're not going down, right? Inflation is still up, and he wanted to get rid of I forget his name, the head of the Fed, and that didn't go anywhere. I'm going to assume he's going to begin panicking even more. As And again, it would take another week. That's when we're going to see how much fuel is um, is there in European reserves, because uh, how Europe is going to conduct the war against Russia and Ukraine is also vitally important to the Americans, despite what they'll say. Like Vance visit Orban with his kiss of death. you know, that sealed his fate. Vance shows up like you haven't learned not to support Israel by now. Like
I mean,
Maloney is playing this so smart, much smarter than he did.
I would argue that it was a deliberate sabotage war bomb, but I don't give that much strategic foresight
I
to the
agree.
administration.
someone someone must have suggested it, and these guys are so egotistical. They went like, "Yeah, if we go, we could make a difference." You probably did make a difference, but not how you thought it made a difference.
Yeah, but
I
like I said,
honestly think that.
I'll pick up on that thread in just a moment. But what I want to focus on right now was just the absolute um I don't know, nightmare of the announcement of the ceasefire on the 7th with the dueling statements between Arachi and Trump and the points allegedly agreed upon, followed up by the alleged strikes and the fire in Abu Dhabi almost immediately after the ceasefire took place, leading into just Israel's Operation Eternal Darkness, Operation Hell, that they're just going to bomb Lebanon. I guess back into the Stone Ages where we're bombing people now. That's the terminology they like to use these days. But there was the speech Trump gave on Tuesday the 7th, and that was him announcing the 2 week ceasefire, that they'd agreed to it, and that Vance, Kushner, and Witkoff, the dream team, were going to Pakistan in order to hammer out an agreement with the Iranians. Now, that happened on Sunday, which resulted in nothing. The meeting lasted only a few hours before Vance came out and said, "Oh, sorry, no deal." Some people thought it might have been hardball, but I think it was very predictable that there wasn't going to be a deal, that they were going to look at the 10 points that they quote unquote agreed to as a condition for the ceasefire, which at this point there's no real point in going over a dead letter in effect. So I'm not going to bog you guys down with the terms. There's plenty of coverage of that elsewhere. And from that, we're now, like I said, Tuesday the 14th. And the main military conflict out of the Middle East has been that Israel has been bombing Lebanon for about the past week, from Wednesday the 8th onward. So, as we had mentioned at the top of the show, we both just came off of celebrating Holy Week and Easter on the Julian calendar, as the Orthodox Church does. Lebanon, the most Christian country in the Middle East objectively, many of
Yeah.
whom are Orthodox under the Antiochian Church, were greeted with, in, I don't know, their holiest time of year, with Israeli bombs. And you can't even say it was about Hezbollah at this point, because they were bombing Beirut itself. And
Yeah.
it's just carte blanche. And we've discussed this in previous episodes, but you go back to the 80s, at least the Maronite Catholics were, I guess you could say, an ally of convenience for Israel, where they were willing to overlook certain things about each other in order to accomplish a common goal. But ever since the Syrian civil war and the subsequent fall of Assad, Hezbollah, love them or hate them, think what you will about them as an organization, objectively has done an immense amount of has suppose I should say, gathered an immense amount of goodwill towards both the Syrian and Lebanese Christian populations,
Mhm.
particularly in the fight against ISIS, and now in the fight against Israel, because Israel has dropped all pretense. The quote unquote Christian allies that they spent decades cultivating, they're no better. Lebanon is ours. We want everything south of the Litani River. We're not even going to humor you with some sort of puppet state under our control. No, we're going to ethnically cleanse you, whether you're Christian, Sunni, Shia, whatever. We don't care. You're not an Israeli Jew, therefore you have to be expelled from this land. Go to Europe, go to South America, go to where. Just get out of here. That's the only thing they care about. And I mean, like I said, the, not that Israel has never bombed Beirut before, but the extent to which they bombed Beirut was unprecedented. And I
It was
think,
that one day where they killed 300 people.
oh yeah, and that was, yeah, I think that's most recent count, 300 people in just a single day.
300 people.
And like I said, it was indiscriminate for those of you who, I don't think there's anyone in the audience who would do that, but just for people in general who want to use the Hezbollah excuse, it's completely off the table. It is a war. It's total war. It is a terror bombing. There's no question about it. They want to expand into Lebanon. They want to crush any semblance of resistance. Anything that they view as a slight threat must be crushed. And I'll tell you what I think, at least in the United States, interesting narratively that happened. Now, I've said previously, Tucker Carlson, I have a great deal of reservations about. But ever since this Iran war started, I'll just say his program has been very interesting. It's something that I would passively visit to, something where over the past month I've been consistently listening to what he puts out. Not necessarily because I agree with all of it, not necessarily because I like all of it, but because I think the role he's playing, especially post Joe Kent, is a very
Yep.
interesting counter narrative construction, which does, I suppose, give credence to some of the idea that there are levels of discontent within the elite that are willing to use their own assets to, I don't know, maybe force some sort of reform, cut off a finger to save the hand, so to speak. And that finger might be Israel, or at least the extent to which the United States currently supports Zionism. But you have Tucker Carlson, who, throughout his media career the past 10 years, from his later time on Fox News into his independent network, has always known what lines not to cross. This is the same man in 2018 who will tell you that bombing Syria is a bad idea. We can't repeat the mistakes we made in Iraq, but we'll never really get down to the nitty gritty of why that's happening. Maybe a passive mention of Israel's being too aggressive, but we're now at a position where he hasn't come out as full anti-Zionist. He hasn't gone mask off in that sense because, number one, I don't think he actually believes that. Number two, that's not what the narrative wants. But he has been allowed to, I'll just put it that way, by whoever's funding him, by whatever elite faction he's aligned himself with. He's been allowed to say that the Israeli project has gone too far and it has to be reined in. Once again, not calling for any sort of dismantlement of Israel, not towards any sort of substantial anti-Zionism that I imagine many would like to see from really across the political spectrum. I think people are just beyond neutrality on Israel. I think that Israel has burned up virtually all of its goodwill beyond center-right conservatives, and even that is a bit of a stretch to say. But we're at a point where you have a guy who used to be a mainstream media figure, still has a substantial independent network, quote-unquote independent network. Of course, there's always funding coming in from somewhere, support coming in from somewhere else. Pretty much saying that Israel needs to be reined in, Netanyahu is a liability, and that they need to be quote unquote any other country. They're still our ally, of course, because nobody's going to break that taboo. But we need to treat them more like a conventional ally than the quote unquote special relationship. Like I said, make what you will about him as an individual, but the narrative he is peddling and on whose behalf he's peddling, I have found extremely interesting. And I think it really all culminated in the breaking of the ceasefire because he did an episode on that and on what in particular was happening in Lebanon. So there's a certain breakdown because look, everyone in the establishment wanted regime change in Iran. That's just no question about it. But they realized direct confrontation, like the Israelis constantly kvetch about, was a disaster, and that once Trump went through with that, it was a disaster. So they needed to do immense amount of damage control, whether that's from the establishment left, whether that's from more of the, I guess you could say, I don't even want to use the term distant right because I don't really think it applies, but the less conventional right, just for the sake of argument. And while there still probably is a broad consensus to this day that, yeah, the Islamic Republic of Iran should be replaced with a more pliant system, everyone beyond the hardcore Zionist faction of the American, I guess you could say, deep state, realizes that direct military confrontation has been a disaster that we have only begun to see the consequences of in the immediate sense, not to mention the years, if not decade long consequences we'll have from this.
Yeah, beautifully.
But that's all I can really say about the Iran issue because that's really the most caught up we are on that. And one last thing I will say about Tucker Carlson because, like I said, think what you will about the man. I think he's a very interesting gauge for narrative and counter narrative, whether one loves him or hates him.
He's very good at what he does,
Oh, absolutely.
and he's always been consistently the first mainstream figure with a certain amount of respectability that has broken, the so-called Overton window each and every time. He was the first to have Nick Fuentes, right? And then he's on BBC for an interview. And he's being interviewed about why did you have Nick Fuentes if doesn't that prove you're an anti-Semite? He goes, well, I don't agree with Nick. So he's basically saying is like, I mean, it's brilliant, right? He's on the BBC discussing this, which gives, in a sense, a platform to him and Fuentes, right? But now this is, I mean, his angle is extremely strategic, right? If he's basically saying the only reason this happened is because of Israel. And I think there are two ways of looking at that.
And then he'll narrow it down to the Likud party in particular.
Yes. Now, in immediate terms, for this particular war, the so far 40-day war, I've said it, you've said yes, ultimately Israel wanted this war, but like, think of all the weeks that the Americans sent all their battleships and cruisers, submarines, and aircraft carriers and whatnot. Think of all the weeks that took. Okay, and the Israelis attacked first. I mean, what do you expect the Israelis to deduce from that? Right? We know that, according to the New York Times, the overall plan was pitched in November 2025 by Netanyahu. And you have to counterbalance this with the fact that Biden said no to him, Obama said no to him, Bush said no to him,
Trump said no in his first term.
He did. Not this time, but he did. And for whatever reason, they have to do it. And they could, I don't know if it's the Epstein files or not. It won't be earth-shattering because I think in many ways people are kind of blasé. They feel helpless. They can't change the situation. And if you can kill 165 schoolgirls on your first day of the bombing campaign, I mean, it won't be the first time Trump is maybe responsible for killing children, but maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't know. But in any case, yeah, this is a war that Israel wanted, absolutely, right? But it's also a war that America wants, because ultimately they believe it will make an impact in China.
Yeah, and also it's that gateway to Central Asia.
Right. And they think that's it. If they do this, they've got it all in the bag. right? Remember that Israel was bombing all of the railroad structure that was. Remember we talked about it in 2025, the railroad from China to Iran. Okay, that's been rebuilt, but it was the Israelis that bombed it on the last day before the ceasefire, right? And a academic agent has speculated this, but the speculation that that's what drew in the Chinese to persuade Iran. Now, I think if that really did happen, there wouldn't be another blockade, right? That won't be enough. Uh, so maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But obviously, I said this last year. Destroying Iran is also an American interest. It's not strictly an Israeli interest. But what I appreciate by what Tucker Carlson is doing, because he's smart enough to know this, he knows this is true, but someone has to be blamed, he was way ahead of the curve. But you have other sort of alternative media celebrities like Jones and Owens and Fuentes and so on and so on. But what he's trying to say is like, we're going to blame the Jews. We're going to blame them. And if you look at the New York Times article, it understands that as well. They're basically saying if stopping the war in Iran, if we can contribute to stopping it by bad press, and you can see it visibly upsets Trump. If that means Israel is betrayed or the blame falls on Israel, I mean, it will fall on Hegseth, it will fall on Trump, it will even fall on Vance to a certain degree. But if Israel has to be sacrificed in order for this to happen, then we'll do it. And I think that's the approach that Tucker Carlson is using. And for that, I applaud him. Like I say, it's not the whole truth. And I think he knows that. But he knows who the fall guys should be. And Israel will be one of those fall guys.
Now, on the other hand, I want to pick up on what you're saying here, where Israel is going to be one of those fall guys, where they are going to take the lumps for this. And you know what? Good. They deserve a lot of it, frankly.
They deserve all of it. I don't care how untrue or true it is.
Oh yeah, no,
They deserve it.
yeah, I'm on the complete same page. But what the other thing I find interesting is between this, the New York Times article you mentioned, and just the general narrative going around is the seeming rehabilitation of Vance, trying to make him look like the only sane man in the room who, if it were up to him, none of this would have ever happened. Where I can agree on a certain level that he probably didn't want this. Maybe not for the reasons that, say, we wouldn't, or for the most altruistic reasons either. But I could see him pragmatically, even beyond his own career, but in terms of his view of American strategy, may have thought this a bad idea. But I do certainly think they're playing up the innocent Vance narrative for very obvious
who's
reasons.
disputing it? Disputing it.
Exactly. Nobody.
No one disputes it. That's interesting.
Yeah, and it like when even the New York Times is running to his defense, I think you can raise an eyebrow or two.
Yeah.
And I think this is more out there speculation, but I'm not going to discount the possibility. The idea of, say, a 25th Amendment where they try to get the cabinet to say Trump is mentally unfit to continue serving in office, or a more traditional impeachment and removal from office with the projected Democratic success in the midterms come November, where they want Vance to be the transitory figure who leads into whether he is the inheritor of this new direction for the regime or whether he is just the interim guy. It's really anyone's guess. I think they put a lot of money and investment into this guy, going all the way back to the beginning of his career, just with his book deal and with his associations with Peter Thiel, all of that. I think that's a lot of investment for him just to be an interim figure. But point being is, I do think, if not him, he's being used to lay the groundwork for a restructuring of the American empire that is very much in line with, say, a division of labor theory. And there's a reason why I think that, at least in rhetoric, he is so, I wouldn't say outright hostile, but is so contentious towards Europe and its leadership, because there needs to be that idea of the transatlantic relationship exists in a fundamentally different form now. In Vance, he can play on a lot of populist energy. A lot of Americans who are skeptical of NATO and say, well, we're paying all these bills and you guys are all freeloading socialists who buy gas from Russia, et cetera, et cetera. All the narratives you've been hearing for years with that. And like I said, whether it's going to be him who is at the helm of that, whether he is just going to be one of these figures that facilitates it happening, I think it's really anyone's guess. But there's a reason why he has come out of this smelling like a rose, and it's not coincidental. It's not because he has such good PR. In fact, one could say, going back to the 2024 election, he had mediocre PR at best, where he was. At least they attempted to make him a punching bag. I wouldn't exactly say they succeeded, but they're also up against Joe Biden, Kamala Harris. That's a hard sell to make somebody else a punching bag. And with all of that, I'll be curious to see what happens after the midterms, because I don't know, I'm on the fence about Trump. He'll definitely be impeached again, but I find it much harder to believe that the Senate will actually vote to remove him from office. But point being
I do too.
But point being is a House impeachment that refers it to the Senate will just destroy any political capital he had left, which wasn't very much in the first place. And whether that's just to set that up for Vance to distance himself and assume the Republican nomination in 2028 so he can be the transitory figure so they can keep the founding stock of the nation, if you will, the normal white guy thinking that, oh, it's still my faction in power. Because look, Gavin Newsom, he's good at what he does. He's a swindler. He's a good politician, but I don't think he sells the narrative of the kind of that they want to appeal to the disenfranchised white man, and that's what they tried to do with Trump, but they overplayed their hand. So now they need the real salt of the earth, mountain town boy J.D. Vance to do it. And I think that's what they're setting up to do in one form or another.
I think that's a brilliant explanation. But Slovenia today is apparently they're serious. Slovenia's newly appointed parliamentary speaker Zoran Stefanovic says he will be ahead with a referendum on the country's withdrawal from NATO.
Is there any credence that he's an ethnic Serb? Because I saw that being circulated.
Stefanovic is, I think it's a very Serbian name.
It sounds like it. I would. You
now,
know better than
now
I
know a Milanovic who is Serbian, but I also know a Milanovic that is Croatian. Some of them,
it bleeds over.
might
I
have,
imagine.
yeah. So, this is the first. I don't know what that the harbinger of that will be. Will it be successful? If it is, will it have an effect on other countries?
I hope so. I'll forgive everything I've said about Slovenia if they vote to leave NATO.
I know.
They will occupy a whole. I'll overlook the gay marriage thing. I'm 100% serious. I'm not approving of it, but I will view it in context if that is the case. If they get a break from NATO, which I do think all of that is interesting in the light of Soros's golden boy winning in Hungary with a super majority. Now, I think just about everyone, including us, misunderstands who Peter Magyar actually is. And I'm not going to sit here and mount a defense of him, but I want to mount an explanation of who this guy is, to my understanding. Any Hungarians with deeper insight, feel free to correct me or clarify any of my points. This guy is a former Orban ally who broke from him a couple years back from a more right-wing perspective in order to criticize him mainly on corruption issues that are bound to develop after anyone holds power for 16 years, but also gain the support of the liberals as the most viable opposition, which then came with it the support from Brussels, where you read a lot of his campaign rhetoric. He still, at least publicly presents as a Ukraine skeptic, says that the Orban government was weak on migration, which I do think there's a case to be made that with some of the legal immigration numbers, Uh, there was some to be desired, even though I saw most non-European, and that's including both EU and non-EU, foreign nationals were from China, which, considering that India usually occupies that spot, uh, I can't find that too objectionable. And it was in the tens of thousands. Now, this is a country of 10 million people we're talking about. But point being is, I do think that looking at it objectively, Orban's government did live up to as much as of an anti-migration regime as you can in modern Europe, especially under the constraints of
Given that he's in the EU
yeah.
and in NATO and under American pressure, constant American pressure, whether it's the left or the right,
Oh,
it's
absolutely.
about as much as you could expect.
And this is
They chose
also
they chose their path, and that's the path. That's the path you take.
a man who has deep relations with Russia and China to offset Brussels and Washington. And despite his public friendship with Netanyahu, which I think was the real poison pill, I'll get into that in a minute. You look at the actual brass tacks of the situation. Hungary and Iran actually had decent relations to the point where Hungary and Iran shared intelligence over the Israeli attack against Hezbollah with the Pages in 2024. So that's
I did not know that.
yeah, that was and I remember there were Israeli officials, there were all the normal think tanks in the USA that were fetching that, like, oh, Orban, he'll be friend of Europe, not friend of Europe, friend of Jews, friend of Israel, but then he'll cooperate with Iranian intelligence. So while Orban did play the Zio right card, which I do not condone, in terms of how he balanced that compared to, say,
Yes.
a Maloney or a Le Pen or any of these other Euro right populists, I don't think any of the other ones would have. Now, Maloney, I think in the wake of the Iran war, is taking an interesting position. I'll get into that in a little bit. But I do think it's interesting that, I mean, who else would have been at least in a dialogue with the Iranians after Israel commits an unprecedented attack? I mean, based Macron wouldn't have, Starmer wouldn't have, Friedrich Merz or Olaf Scholz, none of these people would have. And I'm not saying this to eulogize Viktor Orban. Like I said, I can understand many of the criticisms and many of the frustrations that the Hungarian populace probably had with him. And that, yes, a public affiliation with Netanyahu, even if it is largely just a symbolic thing, same with Donald Trump, is a poison pill, especially after Trump's second term, especially after the Gaza war after October 7th. And that these are things that did dearly cost him. But the thing is about Peter Magyar, he campaigned on many of the same policies, in fact, promising to double down. Now, he's made statements that we'll get back in line with Europe on NATO and integration, but also at the same time makes comments that integrating Ukraine into the European Union is impossible. He's talking out of both sides of his mouth because this is a guy
Yes. Yeah.
who got elected on what is ostensibly a right-wing populist platform and is set to inherit a number of economic and foreign policy positions from Orban just because of the agreements he signed. I mean, we're talking about nuclear reactors from Russia, energy contracts with Russia that are set to last in the 2030s. You're not getting out of those. It would be a disaster for the Hungarian nation economically. They're simply locked in. But what Peter Magyar represents is he is a transitory figure. He can get there. He can deliver the soft version of Orbanism. And then once we get into 2030, the next slated election, 2030, 2031, point being is it's going to be the next 4 to 5 years. I can't remember what their election cycles run on. Or if his government collapses sooner, then you can get the real Eurocrat in power. Then you can get the real Brussels-aligned candidate in power. Then you can get the guy who George Soros and Alex Soros really want in power. But point being is Peter Magyar, regardless of what you think of the individual, the role he's playing right now, even if he doesn't quite realize it himself, which I question, but even just assuming he doesn't realize it himself, is the sedative in order to administer something far worse.
Yeah, and I will say a few things about him and Orban. Um, Now, people, of course, the Eurocrats are going to look at this as a major victory. Orban has finally been defeated after 16 years of being president of Hungary, et cetera, et cetera. And he's finally been ousted. The long-awaited ousting of Orban has finally occurred. Uh, Now, people have said that one of the reasons for the ousting is that Orban was withholding $90 billion of funding to Ukraine to keep it afloat. Notwithstanding everything we have mentioned on the show, where the economy, the global economy, but Europe's economy in particular, will diverge towards. Notwithstanding that, I think in many ways they didn't pressure him that much on giving of uh, uh, some kind of an accord and going along, because Orban every other time during this 4-year war, will always finally buckle and give the okay for new funding to be sent to Ukraine.
Yes,
He
once he
always
gets his
has.
exemptions, he approves.
Yes, yes, that didn't happen this time. But I think part of it is because they knew it would be strategically in their strategically better for them that he does not take it, and he could not, after refusing to do so, then acquiesce and say, "Oh, here, Ukraine can have the money." Also, remember that the Druzhba pipeline that the Ukrainians have destroyed repeatedly, right? And Peter Magyar said that not one inch of territory should be ceded by the Ukrainians to the Russians. The Russians are at fault for this war. It's a crying shame that Ukraine couldn't commit a genocide of Russian Ukraine. That was so sad for the Europeans, but and for a lot of Americans as well. But uh, you know, he also mentioned, as you rightly brought up earlier, that he does speak from both sides of the mouth, and he says, "Well, our energy pact with Russia will not change. We will still we will get the majority of our energy from Russia." So, yeah, he's a mixed bag. And again, I want to highlight Maloney. Maloney has not only not taken the side and not given the Americans the use of certain bases for their attacks on Iran. She played that right. Not that that was an option that Hungary had, which it did not, but she also took the side of the Pope and Trump's latest, it's Trump's latest beef with the Pope. I love it. He says he's soft on. He didn't say he's soft on crime, but he said something words to that effect. It's like, listen, idiot. He's not a politician. What are you talking about? Soft on crime, like.
Yeah, I mean, what's the Vatican's crime rate? Probably pretty low. I would imagine.
Yeah. Well, there are some very interesting tales, but that's for another show.
Yeah,
But
just
um,
ostensibly though.
but I'm saying politically, Maloney chose the right path.
Oh yeah, and I mean domestically in Italy, and yeah, you can ask how much their Catholicism is confessional versus cultural. But point being is that's I mean, look, the Italian Communist Party uh, touts its connections to the Catholic Church. It's you're not getting around it in a country like Italy. So,
Yeah.
but Maloney was really bound by every facet of self-interest to take the Pope's side in this. But I will say Trump's feud with and just the entire alleged Vatican papacy feud was also something else where look, I've seen people and people not interested in defending Trump, mind you, who refute that Pentagon officials got into a spat with the Vatican ambassador when the alleged mention of the Avignon papacy was brought up. And I haven't been able to really make heads or tails of it. I wouldn't be shocked if whatever moron Hegseth sent to kvetch the Vatican brought something like that up, just brought up a vague historical reference saying, well, you better get on board because we run the show right now. And I mean, look, with all due respect to our Catholic audience, I don't mean this as any sort of polemic against your faith, but just in terms of the political alignment of the institutional Catholic Church, since the Cold War, they've been in the Atlanticist camp. At least the Vatican is an institution. I'm not, and like I said, I'm not saying that to start some religious debate. There's other reasons I'm not Catholic, and I'm not here to finger wag at you. But point being is, the institution of the papacy and the Vatican have been solidly in the Atlanticist camp since the end of World War II. There's just no getting around that. So once again, we have somebody criticizing the excesses of this, and probably Pope Leo, to his credit as an individual and as clearly a man, I would assume, of deep faith. I would hope, just for the sake of the position he holds, probably does have personal qualms with the idea of war. And you'll notice he's been also very vocal about Ukraine, saying Russia needs to back down, et cetera, et cetera. So, look, as far as that's concerned, it probably is a personal conviction on his part that he's using his office to promote, which I can't blame him for. But the idea that the Trump administration has some vested interest in making sure the Pope blesses their quote unquote crusade for greater Israel, it's ridiculous. And the cursed image from this week. Yeah, I'm just naming this file cursed. I'm sure you've all seen it. But Trump, this is Trump as Trump is a Red Cross doctor, as he thought, in his words. So just to drive the point home, I do not condone anything in this image. I'm sharing this simply for the sake of public information. Donald Trump shared to his Truth Social him depicted as he said, a Red Cross doctor, which it clearly couldn't be anything else. There's clearly no other implication as to what this could be.
It's not Jesus.
No, not. You would have to be complete troglodyte to assume that. I'm sorry.
It's a doctor from 2,000 years ago with
with mystical powers to heal. Like it's
yeah.
You're a troglodyte if you assume it's anything besides the Red Cross.
Yeah, with exosets coming out of his hands, and it's just.
I love AI slop. It's the best. And then you have like the quote unquote angelic beings who look more like demons than anything. It's.
But Nick Adams shared the original post from February, I think February 4th. It's Trump's administration that changed that. I'll send it to you. He actually made it demonic, or I don't know what that creature is in the middle.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, here's the original cursed image. It's.
Like they're both absolutely cursed, but one is cursed with something ominous about it.
Yeah. I don't know. Does this change Trump's stance as an Ottoman Sultan? That's the question I need to get to the bottom of.
No.
So we'll just put these side by side. Once again, I apologize for subjecting you guys to this, but just for the sake of public interest, for the sake of covering this story.
If you don't laugh, you cry, right?
Yeah. Exactly. But yeah. So our Easter was greeted with this image, and Western Easter, once again, I'll say for the sake of civility and a conciliatory nature, was greeted with "Open the straits, you crazy bastards." And wasn't that the Praise Allah one that he also had?
Yeah, praise Allah.
So, I mean, like I said, I've defended Trump both justly and justly many times in the past, but this is. It's obviously the same man, but this is a man in a much different mental state than he was, 5, 6, 7, or 8 years ago. It's just simply that way. His age has caught up to him. His life experience over this past decade has caught up to him. I mean, when he speaks now, whenever I hear him speak, he talks like a parody of himself from 10 years ago. That's what it's like right now. And look, I've tried for a long time to be above it, and we've always we've always laughed at the man's absurdities, don't get me wrong, but I've tried to be above it and look at him as an actor in a broader, I guess you could say, game on the world stage, much like I try to view any other leader, whether it's Putin, Xi Jinping, Macron, etc. But the man has made so many unforced errors, or whoever's advising him has made so many unforced errors. you need to talk about the spectacle of the person at this point, because the spectacle of Donald Trump was tempered by forces, whether you love them or hate them in his first term, that were fundamentally organs of the state. Like I said, you don't have to like them, but that's what it was. Donald Trump in his second term has dispensed with that entirely, and not for the better. And one might think on the surface, good, the organs of the state, they failed us before, they have no place in it. Well, that only works when you are pursuing a, for lack of a better word, radical agenda where you bring in competent administrators who are able to break from the state. But as we saw, he brought in people who are just, I would say, mostly hardline Zionist interests, and then secondarily Silicon Valley interests. And there's a large overlap there, don't get me wrong. And the entire thing is they deliver, while they commit all of their machinations and while they get Trump to go along with them, they give us a husk of the Trump that people on our side fell in love with. The absurdity, the humor, the offhand comments. All the charm is gone. Maybe it's because we're sick of it, or maybe it's because it's a parody of what it used to be. And I lean more on the latter of that argument.
Hmm.
Which
Yeah, I think it's the latter. A lot of his energy is not there, and now he does. He's sort of like, I don't know, Pete Hecht's granddad. But they both have this kind of puerile obsession with uh, just frankly sounding cruel, like reveling in cruelty.
yeah, it's
It's really a page out of the Israeli Jewish Handbook.
yeah, it is. And I think what somebody said during the debacle with the ICE agents who kept getting into these shooting incidents, where it's a very, I hate the term, but it works, a very performative cruelty where you have all these flashy confrontations and these ICE officers who are very trigger happy, but at the same time, you don't have the deportation numbers to match the excesses. And so you get the worst of both worlds. And then in a retaliatory sense, you're going to have a propaganda reel for the next guy to come along, Gavin Newsom, let's just say for the sake of a placeholder, but also none of the results that you would hope may have been. Look, people can justify breaking a few eggs to make an omelet, but if you don't have the omelet, it's pointless. And
Yeah.
that's what we have with Trump, especially with his position on legal immigration being just as bad, if not worse, than, say, the inaction on illegal immigration, where I'm not going to litigate that. That's been done to death, but just to hammer the point home here. And I suppose on that note, while we're on Trump's absurdity, we can go back to Hungary and discuss some of the other factors there and some of the other things and what I think some of the countermeasures of the remaining sane parties in Europe, and by that I mean Robert Fico. He's been the one I've been forced to throw all my chips behind because I can't root for anyone else at this point. I'm with Fico all the way now.
Who's left? Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, there is nobody left. I guess Babiš in the Czech Republic, but even he leaves a lot to be desired. I'll just leave it at that. But apparently, Fico has pledged that he will take up the mantle of Orban stonewalling, particularly on this $90 billion loan. Now, I don't know if that's going to be the case. I know that previously Fico has conceded while saying, I have no choice but to concede, the European Union's too powerful, which he is correct, but it also doesn't inspire much confidence in terms of being a renegade populist, possibly the last in Europe. And I hope he can. I hope that he has the wherewithal to resist. I know he staved off one color revolution last year around the time they were trying to pull it in Serbia as well. But even he has a shelf life. Because Orban, who went to great lengths to secure himself institutionally, was still unseated. And Fico is in nowhere near as strong a position domestically, to my understanding of politics in Slovakia. I could be wrong with that.
No, I know.
But what Magyar does, aside from serving as a transitory figure, he also serves as an accelerant for Europe to march headfirst into destruction. Because there's no breaks. Hungary, which has resisted being a logistics hub, now it still did host American military presence, but has resisted being explicitly a logistics hub, is now opened. They can, I mean, Magyar probably will let them funnel some limited aid, maybe not to the extent of Poland or Romania, but he will allow some limited aid to pass through Hungarian territory into Ukraine. The feud with Zelensky will likely be less intense. Now, I think there are certain issues that, once again, Magyar has inherited where he will have to be at odds with Zelensky on those, but he's not going to be as fierce as, say, Orban was. He's not going to have the same level of contact with the Russians that Orban did. He said, yeah, well, I'll take a phone call from Putin because we're in the same neighborhood. It's just something I have to do. But there's not going to be the kind of proactive relationship where Peter Szijjártó can really speak on behalf of the last elements of Europe who don't want to march into a continental war. And that's gone. That's all gone. And like I said, I don't think Magyar is going to be the one who is the driving force behind all of this. But the last barrier of resistance has been lifted, and that's combined with the recent news I'd mentioned towards the top of the show of the travel restrictions. Anything over 3 months needs to be reported to German military officials for German men ages 17 to 45. The
Amazing.
renewed push by Friedrich Merz in his meeting with Zelensky about the repatriation of military-aged Ukrainian men back to Ukraine. Similar murmurs in Poland. Donald Tusk's rhetoric in general. Mind you that one of Magyar's first meetings was with Donald Tusk. Or one of his first announced meetings is going to be with Donald Tusk, I should say, who insists on correcting the Polish population, saying that this is indeed Poland's war. And how you want to logic that, I'll leave that to you. And it goes back to what Soros laid out in 1993. Just wave after wave of these small European nations until Russia buckles. Ukraine was the first one. Poland and Romania will likely be next if this conflict is able to continue if the Russians are not able to resolve this on their terms to the point where they can dictate terms to Europe, which I think that's still a possibility, but the longer this war goes on, the more that possibility slips away. And the more urgent Europe feels this is, the more likely they are to do something stupid, like send in Poland and Romania to be the next wave in the meat grinder. And Hungary, while it's a country of 10 million people, while even if they were to go into full mobilization, they couldn't field that formidable of an army, that's still bodies between Brussels and the Russian army. Because they'll sacrifice anything to preserve their position, so long as Macron
and to preserve so that because America cannot handle large casualties.
No, not at all.
Americans have always, maybe it's because of the Civil War, but Americans always have someone else should die for their causes.
Yes, and it's
that's one way of looking at it.
It's a much harder sell to the American population about existential threats across the ocean, where even if
that's the other part, because they know it doesn't. It's kind of a two-tier security rationale. Why are we going there? Like, here it's safe, no one can harm us here. But on the other hand, they're an empire, and they're obligated, but they don't want to die for it. So that's why they always have to misconstrue the actuality of the situation and make it seem like they're always saving everybody's ass, when in fact it's not the case.
Yes, and I think what you have right here is the American populace is very provincial, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I would argue it's a good thing in many circumstances, but the empire itself, the imperial structure, is very aggressive abroad. And when you have that combination, you get proxy armies made up of anyone they can get to fall for it again.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it looks like there's a lot of people who are willing to sign up and fall for it again. Funny enough, maybe not so much in the case of Iran, but all these Europeans who got cold feet about the Iran war, when you have Keir Starmer saying it's not our war, it's because he thinks Ukraine is his war and that he's willing to
That's
mobilize his
right.
population for that.
Yeah, it could be that when things finally, like, I guess again, the next 2 weeks to 4 weeks, we'll be able to ascertain whether they are ready for this moment. Now, in many ways, as I said at the beginning of the show, mechanization is no longer um, the word of the day for the way the wars are going to be fought in probably anywhere, but because of drone warfare, but definitely not in Ukraine, where drone warfare is so sophisticated, so advanced, and so well utilized that you could see, well, maybe we don't have a lot of rockets. Maybe we don't have a lot of tanks. Maybe we don't need them. Maybe we just have to put in more bodies because drones are unlimited. Mechanized military material is limited, but it's less limited than tanks, uh, infantry fighting vehicles, uh, howitzers, etc. Is uh, bodies. Bodies will be that which can outnumber drones. And it's a distinct possibility. Now, I know we don't have time for it. I did promise on the last show that I would read Emmanuel Todd's article on this. We'll save it for the next show.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, audience.
I don't know.
But
I don't know. Maybe that's something we should rope Geo into. We'll have to see.
yeah, why don't we do that? Why don't we do that? We'll
Uh,
have Gio on the show.
yeah, that it perfect format for it. But no,
Because you know who sent me the article?
uh,
Gio.
I'm shocked.
Right. So let's do that. Next show we have Gio on, and we begin where we leave off now.
Okay, I like that. But I did want to continue on your point
Yes, go ahead.
about the drone warfare and the idea of an infantry heavy force. And logically, yes, that makes sense. But I do think we need to reference the war games that were fought. I think they were in the Czech Republic earlier this year, where Ukrainian representatives from the AFU simulated a
Yes,
drone
I
attack
heard
against
about this.
NATO forces to the point where the NATO forces conceded and said, "Look, you need to go easier on us. We're not getting a good gauge of what our actual fighting capabilities are," and that's what they can look forward to. And I'm not saying it's beyond the European elite to throw these untrained men into the firing line where they will get picked off one by one with drones. But one needs to consider the cost of that to their society. And between that and between what they would have to sacrifice in terms of public spending in order to support a direct war effort, one has to wonder what the breaking point is. And can
Right.
they.
Well, I think they're afraid of a breaking point, right? Like they're afraid of reaching the breaking point. Um, like I said, it's just something that has recently occurred to me. If that's where we are, because like, what is the issue that constantly comes up about Ukraine? Manpower shortage, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean,
Now, I haven't seen any of the videos. I'm very sorry for
no,
interrupting
please
you, but
do.
History Legends came out with a video today I haven't seen. Last week, another video of a big offensive that the Russians are planning. Now, even before then, I've heard other rumors from other geopolitical shows. This is not like those shows, but definitely more military centric. In any case, he's going to a detailed examination. He had some people on both Ukrainian and Russian side that he speaks to that are in the military. So That'll be interesting. Anyhow, that's all I have to say.
Okay, but yeah, to pick up on the point with that, it's going to be incremental because you see Friedrich Merz once again relitigating the idea of deporting military-aged Ukrainian men.
Yeah.
They'll do that first.
Yeah.
They will coordinate with
Yes.
Europe to make that happen, so the Ukrainians can do that, hoping they can crack the Russians that way. And when that fails, it's time to mobilize the Poles and the Romanians and the Hungarians and the Czechs and whoever else. At that point, they're probably hoping to have Fico gone. And then they'll creep a little further west. It's time for the Germans and the Italians. Then they're going to get to the
Hmm.
French and the Spanish. And then and I mean Scandinavia with Finland, that's a different front. They'll be mobilized on their own terms because they're going to be much more focused on the Baltic and northern Russia. But in terms of Ukraine in particular, we're tracking the progress. After the Germans and the Italians, if they fail, it's going to be the French and the Iberians. And once they fail, it's going to be the Anglos. And once they fail, we see how much the American Empire is really committed to holding on to Europe.
Yes. I'll just give you a hint. Emmanuel Todd's argument is the opposite of this.
Oh, please do tell.
He says no, Europeans aren't even fit to do this. They're just not capable. But we'll leave that for the show
Yeah,
because I don't.
I won't dig into that, but I actually do agree with it. But I think that's how insane they are that is the plan they're drawing up.
Yeah. I mean, I see what you mean.
Yeah, but like I said, I don't want to spoil that article, so we'll hold off on discussion of that for now. And we're at about the 2 hour mark. I'll just take a look through my notes to see if there's anything pertinent that I want to discuss. If you have anything to say in the meantime.
No, I think that's it for now, and I think
Oh,
we've.
I saw one last
Mm,
story that it might be relevant in the near future.
sure.
Do you
Mm.
know who the new head of the Mossad is, or more importantly, what his background is?
Oh, isn't he Belarusian Jew?
Yes. So
Yeah.
they are recruiting the most stereotypical shtetl dweller, the creature of the Commonwealth, as it were, to be head of the Mossad, which would imply, I would think, especially if there really is an American empire realignment, if Israel does have to be constrained, that the Mossad is just going to be people like that. Let me look up this guy's name. It was what something you'd expect, but I don't have it offhand. I'll look up this guy's name here.
It's not a Slavic name. It
No,
ends with something like Mon.
new Mossad head.
It's I think it's like a fake German name
Um,
instead of a fake
set to
Slavic
begin
name.
a 5 year term, June 2026. General Roman Goffman. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's one of these pseudo German names. But point being is, if we're to believe that Israel is going to be reined in by certain elements of the American empire once Trump crashes and burns, are we going to see the Mossad directed by people driven by the most petty grievances towards a wider
Yes.
campaign against Russia in coordination with Europe?
Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, Russia said something about that.
And
They are concerned about him.
who was that guy on RT? He was the Likud party guy saying, "Oh, after we defeat Hamas, Ukraine, we're going to support Ukraine and get payback on the Russians."
Right, right. And what did Zelensky do? So Zelensky gave Patriot missiles to Israel. Yeah, so much for a defender of the white race, right?
what? What? You're telling me Mizrahi Jews aren't white?
Yeah. So, yeah.
Well, I would have never guessed that, but I don't want to cast too much of a net too far into the future because I think you run into some problems doing that. But if we are to
Mm.
operate on the assumption that the American empire is going to reign in Israel, that the Middle East is going to be, I guess, somewhat pacified, that concessions are going to be made, And would it not logically follow that Israel is going to be more realigned with the NATO European structure and that their intelligence and military assets will be to that end? I'm not saying that definitively, but working through the logic of what's being put in front of me, I think that's a real possibility.
Yeah.
But that's really all I had. If you have anything last minute,
Last minute, I will say this: I'm a moderator at one of the chats, and I encountered three different guys. I think they were all American, and they were upset because people had emojis, of a American plane being shot down, and et cetera, et cetera. And it's sort of not. I understand, and doing a little bit of, I hate to say it, but moral fagging. It's Easter. How can you do this? Like, we're just, people are fed up. They're fed up with what America's doing. How can you support the troops? And it's like, and it went back and forth. And then one of them said, "Oh, is this, because I warned them, they were insulting me." And I said, "If you keep this up, I'm going to ban you." Right. And then one of them said, "Oh, you're going to get into that? Or is this like a chat only for Russians? Do you want me to again, it's a threat. Do you want me to bring up Russian abortion rates?" Right? He says, like, this is a scary moment for me. So you know what? I looked up. Guess what? I looked up abortion rates for 2026. See if 20, 30-year-olds is right. I mean, I know they say it because on many levels they despise Russia. They feel sorry for it. They only feel sorry for the Tsar because, I don't know, he wasn't ethnically Russian. I don't know. It's just crocodile tears. So, oh wow. So Russia's abortion rate is similar to Canada's and America's. Who has higher abortion rates in Europe? I see Moldova, Greece, France is about the same, but Sweden, Sweden and Britain have higher rates of abortions. Of course, just look at Central and South America, Asia, India. Like, give me a break, right? Like, that's what I mean. And when he said that, like, I knew this was false. But when they say that, I know what they're doing. I know exactly. So what I did was I waited a day later and I banned them anyways. When they reached out to me, what was your excuse? And I just wished them a happy Easter.
this man is a tyrant. Do not cross him. He would ban me from my own show if I stepped out of line. Believe me.
If you just listen to me, buddy. Yeah.
There's a reason I keep this guy around, by the way, and it's not for the commentary. No, it is it is for the commentary, I don't know. I said before we started the show, I don't think you can go more than 10 minutes without a punchline.
Yeah, you know what I mean. Like,
No, I
I know
know
these
what you
guys.
mean.
How long? I mean, we've known each other on Twitter since like 2017 or 18. How many times have I heard these lines? Like, dude, I've been like, yeah, you know it just as well. But I'm just gonna say, I've been around a long time, a
Did you know
long
that
time.
Russia has a Muslim population, and that
Oh
and
no!
that Chechens are the same thing as Algerians who washed up on the shores of France 5 years ago?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Did you know that HIV rates increased after the collapse of the Soviet Union that also coincided with removing Soviet prohibitions on certain activities that I'll leave to your imagination? No, isn't that interesting? Where
Yeah.
wow, they revoke certain Stalin era decrees, and suddenly the consequences of those is shown forth. Can you believe that a country plunged into lawlessness had a drug problem, that the United States now has a worse drug problem? I I mean, you're right. These
They
concerns.
don't care. They pretend to care. It's all fake. They are so duplicitous, and I can spot them from a mile away.
Yeah, it is bizarre, and like there's a lot of things that you could say about it, but it's impotently shaking their fists to the Russians for, I'm not even saying having it good, but better than us in some ways.
Yeah, yeah.
Which, like I said, it's and one of the worst parts is it does make it hard to actually discuss problems about and within Russia because the discourse is so tainted by
Yeah.
that kind of concern trolling, as it were.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which, like I said,
So now
there's a lot
if
of those.
if they're listening to the show now, you know why I banned you.
Are you kidding?
One of these guys was Orthodox. He told me he was Orthodox. Says, actually, I celebrate Easter next week. Oh, you don't celebrate Masonic? I'm joking. Can't not 10 minutes without a punchline. Not even 10 minutes.
Yeah, and the longer the show goes on, the lower the
The
interval
more
is.
punchline.
Yeah. Which is why I love our 3-hour shows. We're pushing 2.5 hours right now, so I think I could leave it at that because we've
Yeah.
covered everything sufficiently. It's almost midnight for both of us,
Yeah.
and I know at least
Yeah.
one of us has something to do tomorrow.
Yeah, I've got to go to work.
Look at point and laugh at this wagey, everyone. That's what I want you to do in the chat. That's what I want you to do in the comments. But with all that being said, thank you everyone very much for tuning into this episode of the War Report. We'll see you guys next time, and goodbye.
Goodbye and take care.